Thank you so much for joining me today. How you doing? We're talking about American healthcare once again today. You know what it is. It's an important topic. Specifically today, why drugs cost more in America. Interesting question. Why do they? Like right here, it says an EpiPen costs $300 in the US and $38 in the UK. That's certainly unfortunate for someone in need of that life-saving technology. If they live in the wrong place. Anyway, I'm interested to see what this video has to say. It's by Vox. Check them out, link down below.
This is an EpiPen. It's a device that injects you with adrenaline if you're having a possibly deadly allergic reaction. If you have severe allergies, you basically need it. And if you
You know, is that really all it is like adrenaline? I'm not much of a scientist myself, but I'm kind of surprised that's patentable. You know what I mean? An injection thing for adrenaline. Because at the end of the day, I think that's why it costs so much money, is because the patent. Obviously, they're selling it for $38 in the UK, so they can profit off of less. So you would think a different company would make it. There must be a patent. But to patent just an injectable adrenaline? I don't know. Maybe it's not adrenaline. Maybe it's something that a drug that like produces adrenaline. I don't
live in the UK, an EpiPen will cost you the equivalent of $38 US. But if you live in the US, it'll
basically a trip out to McDonald's with the family.
Cost you $300. And it's not just the EpiPen. Let's look at 5 of the top selling prescription drugs in the world. Advair, a brand name asthma inhaler, more expensive in the US. Lantus, a type of insulin.
It's not just more expensive, it's like ridiculous.
More expensive in the US. Sovaldi for hepatitis C, yep, costs more in the US.
See, now that one must be expensive to produce, because, wow, $15,000?
Humira for arthritis.
And that's for, you know, that's the cheapest.
Crestor for cholesterol, more expensive in the US.
Because at least, like, that could have some sense to it if you say, yeah, it costs $10,000 to produce. Okay, all right. Now, who should pay the $10,000? That's up for debate and stuff. But when it's something like the EpiPen, that's clearly it doesn't cost that much to produce. The fact that they're selling it to these poor folk for $300 is...
So here's an unsurprising
ruthless
chart. Americans spend more on prescription drugs than anyone else in the world. Why? The first thing you have to understand is that in the US, drugs get to patients differently than almost everywhere else. Let's look at that popular hepatitis C drug, Sovaldi. In 2014, Sovaldi became the first drug to completely cure hepatitis C. Here's how it got to market in, for example, the UK. First, a government agency had to decide that Sovaldi was safe and that it actually worked. Then it was evaluated by a regulatory agency to see if it was worthwhile. Are there too many side effects? Is there already a similar drug? Is there a cheaper option? Sovaldi was deemed worthwhile. Next, they negotiated the price. In the UK, the government...
I'm just thinking about that second step. It's kind of interesting. Is it worthwhile? Is this life-saving drug worthwhile? I mean, I guess what they said, it makes sense. It's just interesting. Okay. All right.
Buys the stock of medicine for the... Next, they negotiated the price. In the UK,
I think this is the important step.
The government buys the stock of medicine for the country. That means they're usually able to get a lower rate, kind of like a bulk discount, which keeps...
And then they're not selling it for profit to their citizens.
Prescription drugs cheaper for UK citizens. In almost every developed country besides the US, this is what the system looks like. Safety evaluation, assessment of whether the country needs it, price negotiations, sold to patients.
I guess what's weird about this worthwhile step to me is it's just like, if you really could benefit from the drug, it sure would suck if these people said it's not worthwhile. But, I mean, I think you could run into that problem anywhere. Like here in America, there's a lot of athletes and stuff that go and get like stem cell treatments that are like amazingly effective for their joint pain and stuff like that. But it's not available here in the US. You have to go to like Mexico or something.
Now let's look at the system in the United States. First, the drug is evaluated for safety. But that's it. If it's safe, they can sell it. End of story. Drugs
Oh, wow. Okay.
are sold by
I wonder why that. I'm still thinking about what I said about the stem cell treatment. I guess they haven't deemed it safe because that's the only step.
Drugs are sold by the drug companies to patients, usually through insurance. And since the US system lets them sell it
So you got two people profiting, the insurance companies and the drug companies, which means, they're both putting their profit margins on top of the price of the drug to produce.
for any price, Gilead, the company that makes Sovaldi, charged Americans more for it. When it first came to market, the entire treatment cost $84,000 in the US. In the UK, just about $58,000 US dollars. That's still a lot of money, but it's a full 30% less. So it seems like the UK has the better system, right? Well, it's complicated. These photos are from protests in the US against the high price of EpiPens. And these are photos from protests in the UK over the lack of access to a cystic fibrosis drug called Orkambi.
I appreciate that they go into some nuance here, you know what I mean? It's important.
That's because when there's a committee that determines whether a new drug is worthwhile,
Hey, they're talking about that. It comes back to the worthwhile people.
sometimes they say no. And when they negotiate the price, sometimes they don't come to an agreement and hit a standoff. That's what's happening with Orkambi. Both systems require trade-offs. Regulated drug markets tend to make drugs more affordable, but some drugs are completely unavailable. And while the US has more drugs technically available, they're often too expensive to actually afford.
Wow, okay. I appreciate the nuance here. You know what I mean? That's a difficult one.
Americans without insurance are the most likely
I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's the issue is you have to incentivize people to produce and research these drugs, which costs a lot of money to produce drugs. And so you need to incentivize them with money. People love money. And so the money's got to, It's like if state-funded research was as effective, that would be not just state-funded, but state research was as effective as just like the free market coming up and producing drugs. That would be the best solution. But I don't think it is, because the free market, people, if you produce a drug that is really effective, you'll get very rich, which in theory is good because it incentivizes you to make an amazing drug. But it causes these issues. It's a really tough problem.
often too expensive to actually afford. While the US has more drugs technically available, they're often too expensive to actually afford. Americans without insurance are the most likely to skip medication because of the cost.
Adults who skipped prescriptions. Almost 40%. I mean, that's not even really counting the people who don't even go to the doctor, which was definitely me. You know what I mean? I didn't even get a prescription to skip it back in the day. Like when I had a sinus infection and stuff like that. Just random, things all the time. I just wouldn't go to the doctor because I was uninsured and could not afford it.
Even Americans with insurance are second. But the commonality between these two systems is the drug companies. Developing new drug products isn't cheap, and they're for-profit businesses. If Gilead didn't think that researching and developing a hepatitis C cure would make them money in the end, they might not have.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like if only humans were purely altruistic and would dedicate their lives to, and I'm sure people do. I'm sure there are people who do that and dedicate their lives to try to come up with these new drugs. But at the end of the day, the whole world runs on money.
And with these regulated markets keeping costs down, the only place drug companies can really make their money is, you guessed it, the US. Americans are essentially subsidizing the cost of drugs for the rest of the world. In other words, a big part of
That sucks for us.
why prescription drugs are more expensive in the US is because they're cheaper everywhere else. If you'd like to continue.
That's actually a really interesting perspective right there. Oh, I can see this got a lot of dislikes, and I can see why. You know what I mean? That is definitely a different take than I've heard. Let's see what the people had to say. I'm curious. I'm sure publicly traded pharma companies lobbying and dirty politicians have nothing to do with it. Yes, that's definitely... You're going to find that at the end of a lot of rabbit holes and problems in the world. The old dirty politicians. Pharmaceutical companies try to maximize their profits. Yes, they charge what they can get. And in America, they can charge anything. Assuming they would lower prices if they charged more elsewhere is foolish. I don't think that's the point that... I don't think that that's the point that this video was saying, honestly. I don't think they were saying, like, oh, other countries should charge more, and that way they'd charge less in America. No, they wouldn't. If they could, they would charge... I do see what they're saying, though, because it is a little bit funny the way they phrase this. To say, oh, they cost more in the US because it costs less elsewhere. I mean, in reality, if the company could charge $300 in the UK for an EpiPen, they would. That's just how the market works. And if it's like a patented drug, then there's not even any competition. So they can really charge... When it's a matter of life and death, you can pretty much charge them and say, give me all your money. Give me all your money for this drug. You seriously going to end the video saying the whole world is making drugs expensive for Americans? Really, Vox? Imagine thinking that drug companies actually do research themselves rather than piggybacking off of publicly funded research. Okay, okay. Imagine that. Imagine that. That is definitely an interesting point. Publicly funded research, you know, at like publicly funded universities and stuff, obviously all sorts of that research that's being paid for by tax dollars is critical in what results in, you know, like he said, piggybacks. It's foundational knowledge for producing new drugs and stuff, so... Yeah. Oh, and EpiPen's only €8 in England. That was interesting. Didn't expect it to end controversially. Ooh, I love a good controversial take. I don't know. I find it interesting. Yes. Lots to think about in this world, folks. No matter how you cut it, seems like the Americans paying $300 for an EpiPen are getting screwed, no matter how you cut it. And I would not put the blame on other countries for doing what's best for their citizens and bargaining for their drug prices. I don't think that's what's to blame. Wow. All right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow.